Hi, I'm Joel Schrank, voiceover talent and entrepreneur. For some people, just having a conversation can be difficult. And for most people, having a difficult conversation is even more difficult. And for pretty much everybody, having a difficult conversation with a difficult person is probably the most difficult thing you're going to have to do. I'm trying to say difficult as many possible times as I can, because today we're going to be talking about how to have difficult conversations. I got my cup of coffee, I'm out of my sound booth right now, and I hope you'll join me as we speak easy about having tough conversations. Simplifying concepts that really help you in life, relationships, and business. This is the Speaking Easy Podcast. So I've said this a couple of times on this podcast so far. This is something that I have in the past and still continue to be not particularly good at. So this is just as much for you as it is for me. This will be a great learning opportunity for both of us. Why do we need to have these difficult and tough conversations? What are we talking about when we're talking about these tough conversations? So just to clarify, when I'm talking about a tough or difficult conversation, I'm talking about approaching someone with something that maybe is bothering you, or maybe that might be a criticism or a point of feedback for them, and having a conversation with them about it. It's probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable. It might be something that you're kind of uncomfortable to bring up, but you know you gotta, otherwise they're just going to keep doing the thing that they are doing that either you don't like or that's causing some sort of negative impact for that person or for people around them, or if you're in a family setting for your kids, if you're in a business setting for your workers, your coworkers, or your subordinates, the people that work for you, or if you're an entrepreneur just for your business. All sorts of different situations where it's appropriate to have a tough conversation, but it's still a tough conversation to have. So how do you do it? Number one, be humble. Just because you're about to have a difficult conversation about something that might actually be pretty upsetting to you, might actually make you angry, doesn't mean that you need to approach the conversation being angry. In fact, if you do go into the conversation angry or upset or frustrated, there's a 99.9% chance it's probably not going to work out well, because you're not going to be in a good head state. You need to be in a place where you can calmly and effectively approach the other person. Now, those two words are not mutually exclusive. You need to be calm in order to be effective. Because if you go in angry or emotional or upset, it's not going to turn out well. It's just going to turn the other person angry, emotional, and upset about whatever it is that you're bringing up. They're going to be mad at you just for being that way. So eat a piece of humble pie and approach the conversation with some humbleness. Now, apart from just approaching the conversation with a humble attitude, you can also approach the conversation with a humble perception of what's going on and recognize that you might have contributed to whatever the problem is that you need to talk to this person about. Accept that you might have some blame. Search the situation. There's almost always something that you can say, hey, I know that I contributed in this way, but I want to talk about how you can help. And then the second piece of that is also accepting that this might just be a you thing. Because just because you have a problem with whatever this person is doing, approaching it from a situation of saying that it's that person's problem because you have the issue, well, that's not going to help. They're just going to say, well, that's your problem. You figure it out. If you approach the situation, again, from a standpoint of being humble and say, hey, I know this is a me thing. Most people might not even really care that much, but here's the problem I'm having with X, Y, and Z, these things that I've noticed that you're doing, and I need you to help me fix this. Maybe it's just a me thing, but I need you to help me with it so that we can move forward and further our relationship, which is really the whole point of having these sorts of conversations. Number two, listen. Now, I've talked about listening a lot on this podcast. I have a couple of episodes devoted entirely to the topic of listening, which I've linked in the description below. But it may seem somewhat counterintuitive in a situation where you're approaching another person in order to have a difficult conversation, in order to give feedback, or in order to solve a problem that you have with that person, and you need to listen to that person. But you do. You need to give them the opportunity to explain or to talk about themselves why they are doing what they're doing, why their side of the problem. everybody has a side. There are always two sides to every problem, and you need to give the other person the opportunity to explain theirs to a point. Because people, I think, have a tendency to, especially when they are being put on the spot and given critical feedback or something that may not necessarily paint themselves in the best light, or maybe some kind of uncomfortable reality about themselves, they have a tendency to kind of go off on a different tangent, or perhaps find some way to lay some other blame on you, the person who's bringing this up to them, or come back and say, well, yeah, maybe I did that, but what about all these things that you did, X, Y, Z, and Y, and X? I was really good at this, by the way, and my wife can attest to this. I'm very, very good at saying, well, you may have a problem with me about this, but what about all these other things that I don't like about you? I was terrible at that for a long time, and it was the worst thing. It made for the worst arguments, and I have grown quite a bit since then. We don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore. But that is something that people have a tendency to do when they're being confronted with an uncomfortable reality by someone. And there's a very nice and easy little catchphrase you can use to get yourself back on topic. You can acknowledge what the person said. Yeah, thank you for sharing. But back to what I was saying, which takes us right into number 3, be specific. You bring the person back to what you're talking about, but make sure that what you're talking about is one thing. It's never a good idea to bring up multiple different grievances, multiple different areas of critical feedback to a person in one conversation. You need to just stick to one thing and be specific about that one thing. You don't want to start airing all of your grievances against a person. They're not going to take it well. Would you? So stick to one thing and make sure that you are specific about that one thing and keep on that point. Number 4, use I statements. Now, that may sound cliche, but it's very important to having a successful, difficult conversation. Remember, you're talking about what you want. You're talking about your feelings. Don't blame the other person for how you feel. Blaming the other person isn't going to do good for anyone. So instead of saying, you make me so angry when you don't wash the dishes, say instead, I feel angry when you don't wash the dishes. Own your own emotions. No one can make you feel angry. No one can make you feel anything. Own your emotions. The problem is yours, but you need the other person to change in order to fix the problem and help heal the relationship. And lastly, number 5, be okay with no. This is a tough one. My wife sometimes tells our kids, sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. Well, that's true for everyone. When you're approaching a difficult conversation like this, sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the person is willing to make a change to help you solve the problem and help repair the relationship and further the relationship. And sometimes it's too much of an ask, and the person is not going to be willing to change. Now, if it's really important to your relationship that this person change, then sure, press it. Ask them again. Make sure that they know. Persistence can pay off. But most of the time, with most things, it's best to just let it go. Just accept that it's no. Be sad for a little bit, maybe, and then move on and forget about it. Because you still have a relationship there. And I find that in most trusting relationships where you've already got a good foundation of trust, that's usually what happens. So there you go. Hopefully this helps you in having that difficult conversation that you need to have with someone. If you do have a difficult conversation, let me know about it in the comments. How did it go? And if you did like this video, be sure you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, let everybody you know about it. If you didn't like this video, well, give me a call and we can have a difficult conversation about it. We'll talk to you again next time.